fall off over distance is exponential, but an increase in the number of sources will mean higher and higher levels of ambient, non-native EMF for everyone. That's the effect of increasing smart tech, the Internet of Things, small cell deployment, and the electric vehicle agendas. Following these agendas will make our neighborhoods uninhabitable due to increasing levels of harmful, man-made, electromagnetic radiation. Coming up. Okay, everything I said last week about the great news of the inverse square law is still great news. It will continue to be great news and an important concept for reducing personal exposure to harmful man-made electromagnetic radiation. Please keep this in mind. It is truly a huge blessing, something worthy of consideration, contemplation, integration into everyday life in this upside-down world in which we're living. And I'd really like to leave it at that. Really, I would, except, well, let's just say there's more. More to consider, more to incorporate into your consideration, your contemplation. You really need to know this. It's time to talk about the dark side of the inverse square law. It's about where and how you can live not only now, but in the future, your children and your grandchildren can live in order to be safest long term, to minimize your and their exposure long term. You see, there are certain initiatives which have the potential to affect us all, increasingly so with time. More and more non-native EMF exposures of all types. There will continue to be safe places. I'm hopeful of that. Places with the most sustainably low levels of non-native EMF. They're going fast. Better get one. But outside of those areas, those wrinkles in the earth, the measurable intensity of exposure to non-native EMF will be increasing, perhaps dramatically, unless initiatives and policies change. I believe those who seek to understand and really internalize what I'm going to share will be best suited to find and maintain the safest levels of exposure. So here's the deal. Last time we learned how a little distance from the source of local non-native EMF results in dramatic reduction of measured intensity. This is a physical phenomenon. No harmonizers involved here. From 100% exposure measured at 1 times the distance to only 25% the intensity at twice the distance, 11% at 3 times the distance, 6% at 4 times the distance. Really good news, and always will be. But here's the thing. It never gets to 0. It's a mathematical concept we call asymptotic. This function becomes asymptotic to 0. It never reaches it. Even at 10, 100, 1,000,000 times the distance from the source, sure, it gets smaller, but never reaches zero. So you might say, well, I can't measure less than 1/1000th of, for example, a microwatt per square meter with the best meter I have anyway. And besides, that's way below the precautionary levels of exposure I use to evaluate safe places. Yes, true on both accounts. So what is the problem? Dramatically increasing number of non-native EMF sources. That is the problem. Initiatives which seek to or merely allow an increase in the number of sources, that's the problem. Especially, critically, the number of sources close to the target. Close to you, close to your children, close to your grandchildren. That's the problem. Every source has an effect. With an increase in the number of sources, especially those closest to you, we will see increasing ambient levels of exposure over time, dramatically increasing levels. Smart tech is today like first century Roman culture. Both of these are based on environmental toxins. Lead and lead poisoning in Rome in the 1st century, and RF radiation and electromagnetic poisoning in the 21st century smart tech. All smart tech has two things in common. It's close, often on or in your home or on your person, and it emits the highest energy form of non-native EMF, which is called RF, or radio frequency radiation. And from our first study of the inverse square law, the good news, the light side, we know that near sources of non-native EMF are the worst. I believe all smart tech, 100%, every bit of it is antithetical to good health and long life. Yes, it can be convenient, amusing, and stimulating. But what about the radiation exposure? Also, there are no controls in place to force or even encourage less harmful levels of RF. There is no governor on this system. There is no safety implemented within any of these. So you can clean it up in your home. Yes, that's what I do every day. It takes some effort dealing not only with the technical aspects of implementing safer, more appropriate technologies, and dealing with the unfortunate addictive nature of smart tech, including classical conditioning involving RF and blue light exposures, but it can be done. You can at least implement a sleep sanctuary to have some peace, some truly regenerative sleep. You can opt out of having smart meters if you live in a free state, that is. But you can't opt out of your neighbor's smart meter and all of your neighbor's smart tech. And that's the issue. Not everyone has the discernment, the wisdom that you have been given Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this podcast, and others may not have the wisdom to minimize their exposure, minimize their sources of RF. That is the issue. And it will affect you and your loved ones. With the proliferation of non-native EMF sources in the environment, there will be an increase in the ambient levels of non-native EMF. Whatever the stated purpose, the effect of programs, initiatives, and practices already at play in our world today is to increase ambient levels of non-native EMF closest to where we live, in our neighborhoods, in our homes. That's a serious problem, one which needs to be addressed. And let me reiterate this one point here. You know, there's a separation, a logical separation between what's being offered in our modern world and what the actual effect of what's being offered is. And you may not get what you think you're getting. So whatever the stated purpose, the effect of programs, initiatives, and practices already at play in our world today, the effect is to increase ambient levels of non-native EMF closest to where we live, in our neighborhoods, in our homes. That's a serious problem. It's one we need to address. We need to separate what's being sold to us and any benefits, which usually have to do with convenience, amusement, and stimulation. We need to separate those from the increase in ambient non-native EMF. Smart appliances in homes, the Internet of Things, smart electric water and gas meters, small cell deployment, and of course, smart phones, smart tablets, smart watches, smart bits, and wearables. All these will increase non-native EMF in your home if you're not careful. Even if you personally opt out of all such things, choices made by others in all these areas will affect you increasingly over time, right? So the degree to which others in our society are duped into going along with these agendas, that's going to affect all of us. And that's the point. Whatever is being said, however it is sold, increasing RF radiation sources in residential areas is a bad idea. So here's the bottom line, putting together what we've learned about the light side, and now we're talking about the dark side of the inverse square law. Fall off over distance is exponential, which is great, right? But an increase in the number of sources will mean higher and higher levels of ambient non-native EMF for everyone. That's the effect of increasing smart tech, the Internet of Things, small cell deployment, and by that I mean this idea of putting a multitude of cell phone antennas in a neighborhood and making them small and not easily recognizable so that people don't realize they are putting essentially small cell phone towers every second or third house. So small cell deployment and the electric vehicle agendas. Following these agendas will make our neighborhoods, I would say, uninhabitable due to increasing levels of harmful man-made electromagnetic radiation. I'm going to repeat it one last time because it's so important for all of us who want to or who must limit personal exposure to non-native EMF. Fall off over distance is exponential. That's great. But an increase in the number of sources will mean higher and higher levels of ambient non-native EMF for everyone. That is the effect of increasing smart tech, the Internet of Things, small cell deployment, and the electric vehicle agendas. The point is, even if you're opting out of those things, what are the implications for those of us who understand this? Two things. Number one, since all forms of non-native EMF easily pass through common building materials, homes that are safe today may not be safe from non-native EMF in the future. Number two, neighborhoods which today are safe from non-native EMF may not be safe from non-native EMF in the near future. What can be done? What is my advice? How do we use this information? The first step is to have a local, qualified professional complete an assessment of the four main types of non-native EMF in your home. A local qualified professional is best. See my podcast episode 11 entitled Finding the Best Qualified EMF Consultant in Your Local Area for a very deep dive on helping you identify that person and why local is so important. From the remediation plan, which comes out of an appropriate assessment from a local qualified professional, you need to implement at a minimum a sleep sanctuary for each person in the home, getting you to ideal exposure levels. Better if you carve out more of your home to be absent harmful levels of all types of EMF where you spend the most time, but at a minimum, carving out a sleep sanctuary. If you can't get to ideal levels in all four types of non-native EMF, you may want to consider a proactive relocation because with the coming explosion of sources, non-native EMF is only going to increase in populated areas. I know, having just said that, if you can't get to ideal levels in all four types of non-native EMF, you may want to consider a proactive relocation because with the coming explosion of sources, non-native EMF is going to increase in populated areas. I know that's a bitter pill. Believe me, I understand. I understand you have a job nearby that you are relying on for your income. You have family ties. You love your church that you're currently attending. You're studying at a nearby university. I understand all these real life things. The point I'm trying to make is you've been given an understanding, or at least a curiosity about, is there a way to not be exposed to harmful man-made electromagnetic radiation? And if you really want to pursue that, you're going to need to prioritize that as a goal in your life. So I'm just saying you may want to consider a proactive relocation. Why? Why a proactive relocation? I'm going to give you 3 reasons. Number 1 is because it is ugly when you are in a panic. When it's not that you would like to consider for strategic reasons getting to a safer place, it's that you must, either because of your own situation or a loved one. I see this so often in my work, and it's heartbreaking when it gets to this point. It's much harder to get through the process when the damage gets to a certain level. Y'all know my story. I should know, right? I lived through this and have helped many people with this reality. It's ugly when you're in a panic, or when it goes from the opportunity to be proactive to, I've got to get out of here, either for myself or for a loved one. All of your, if nothing else, your negotiating position, the financial aspects of needing to do it in a hurry are not optimal. So anyway, number 2 of the 3 reasons you might like to look at a proactive relocation is once people catch on, once people really understand that these agendas that are being promoted in public have a poisonous underbelly, once people really understand what a safe place looks like, that wrinkle in the earth we've talked about, the good ones will be taken quickly. Obviously, the ones closest to the cities, because that's where the family or the university or the job or whatever is located. I mean, that's just supply and demand, right? That's just common sense. Curiously, there's an opportunity here for those who act first, in that the wrinkles in the earth that are protective against harmful man-made electromagnetic radiation are not always viewed as the most desirable places to live from a beautiful view perspective, for example, or accessibility. So once people catch on and really understand what a safe place looks like, that wrinkle in the earth we've talked about, the good ones are going to get taken quickly. That's reason number 2. Number 3, why consider a proactive relocation? You may be able to achieve something that I'm just going to call them city dwellers. I don't mean any disrespect. But areas, what I'm talking about is areas that have a larger concentration of people, whether it be in the hundreds, in the thousands, in the tens, hundreds of thousands, in the millions, depending on what a city is near you. But the more people, the more problem. I think that's what you would pick up from this dark side of the inverse square law. You may be able to achieve something that city dwellers can't, which is the following: a place to spend time outdoors. It's one thing to be able to build a shielded home, complete with a place. When you build a shielded home, everything within the home has a lower exposure to non-native EMF. Everything except the magnetic field exposure levels from ambient. So that's a given, right? But if you're putting a shielded home, for example, in an area with unacceptable levels of non-native EMF, once you leave your front door, you're talking about unacceptable levels of exposure. So you may be able to achieve something city dwellers can't, a safe place to spend time outdoors. What a concept that outdoor living, as beautifully as it may be portrayed in magazines with the barbecues and the swimming pools and all that stuff, may be actually toxic already in many or most cities. And certainly if we continue pursuing these agendas I've talked about, it's going to be impossible to have ideal levels of electric field, magnetic field, and if not ideal, then only slight levels of RF exposure. So if you act quickly, you may be able to find a place where you'll have a lasting ability for the children to play outside, for you to enjoy gardening, earthing, sunbathing, whatever you'd like to do without unacceptable levels of non-native EMF. This type of land, I believe, will become a most valuable commodity. You may want to begin considering a strategic location in any case, especially if you live on flat terrain or near a city of any size. I hope by now the reasons that flat terrain and the proximity to a city of any size are obvious. So we're gonna kind of move towards a close here. And I want to mention that the signals, and I don't mean like radio wave signals, more communication signals, the images, the ideas that are used to promote the desirability of smart tech and of all types, and the Internet of Things, small cell deployment, and the electric vehicle agenda may seem compelling, but all of them ignore the effects of non-native EMF. Let's put this into a historical context from episode number 22. The wine was sweet in old Rome. We talk about this in much greater detail there if you'd like to check it out. First century Romans, we're talking about Romans around the time of Christ, died with chronic lead poisoning because they embraced the sweet wine containing about 20 milligrams of lead per day. That's for men, women, and children because they all drank it. Men, women, and children of all classes, from the slave to the emperor, would have suffered reproductive, neurological, behavioral, and cognitive effects. The wine, and much more and much worse things, and that some of them probably died from this, is a logical assumption, and we get into all that in episode 22. So the wine was sweetened with lead, a terrible choice, a benefit, the sweetness, with an unacceptable cost. So to today, okay, all smart tech, the Internet of Things, small cell antenna deployment, and the electric vehicle agenda. There is an episode just focusing on the electric vehicle agenda, by the way. And it may surprise you how it's going to affect you, even if you never have one, and in the worst possible way. Anyway, all of these things will increase personal exposure to non-native EMF. So interesting that the effects of electromagnetic poisoning Some call it electrohypersensitivity. Nonsense. Anyway, the effects of electromagnetic poisoning include reproductive, neurologic, cognitive, behavioral, and reproductive issues. What a coincidence, right? It's almost like history is telling us something, right? Okay, so the great news about exponential reduction of non-native EMF intensity from a nearby source is still great. Please use it liberally to reduce your personal exposure, and if you have children or grandchildren, to help reduce the exposure to them. The dark side, it never gets to zero part, is not to cause fear. It's there to give us knowledge, to inspire wisdom, to know that certain initiatives now underway are unwise, as they will make our cities and our homes uninhabitable. Get an assessment from a qualified person, preferably locally. If there is no qualified person locally, I can train you. When you have completed that, you will have a remediation plan. Implement that plan. Don't stop short of the actual implementation. When you find your wrinkle in the earth, if you decide that is a strategic thing for you or your family, I can help you with designing your new home from the ground up to be a sanctuary with durable protection from harmful man-made electromagnetic radiation. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.